Welcome back to the Fulker Lab podcast, where intelligence, tradecraft, strategy, leadership, and discernment all collide. Let me ask you a question. How was your week? If you are anything like most leaders I know, your answer is probably something along the lines of busy. Not good, not bad, not productive, not strategic. Busy. You had meetings, you answered emails, you took calls, you dealt with problems you did not create and were not remotely consulted about. You attended a meeting that could have been an email that could have been a text, and a text that probably should have never been sent. You worked hard. You may have even worked late, and now you were tired. But here is the awkward question. Did any of it move the mission forward? Or were you just moving? Because busy is not strategic. A full calendar is not a strategy. A color-coded task list is not a strategy. 47 unopened emails are not a strategy, although they may be a cry for help. And I say this as someone who understands the temptation. Busy feels productive. Busy makes us feel needed. Busy lets us tell ourselves, I cannot deal with that right now. Look at everything on my plate. It also lets us avoid the harder question, which is, what exactly are we trying to accomplish here? That is the difference between motion and progress. Motion is doing things. Progress is moving deliberately toward an outcome that matters. And if you lead people, whether you lead an intelligence team, a business, a church, a nonprofit, a classroom, or a household with 3 people asking where their missing socks are, you must learn the difference. Because the people around you do not need you to just be hardworking. They need you to be clear. There is a problem in leadership that I see constantly. People confuse intensity with effectiveness. We all have met the leader who is always running at full speed. Their phone is always buzzing. Their calendar looks like a game of Tetris played by someone under emotional duress. They have 7 initiatives, 4 task forces, 2 strategic plans, and a whiteboard full of arrows nobody can explain. They are very busy. They are often leading an organization that has no idea what matters most. In intelligence, we have a version of this problem. An analyst can receive an enormous volume of reporting, more cables, more intercepts, more open source material, more briefings, more updates, more data than any human being could reasonably absorb without eventually becoming one with the coffee machine. And the volume creates an illusion. It feels like progress because so much is coming in, but intelligence is not the accumulation of information. It is the disciplined effort to answer a decision maker's question. What do they need to know? What is uncertain? What would change the assessment? What is actually decisive? That is the work. Everything else may be interesting. Some of it may even be important. But if it does not help answer the question that matters, it is not strategic. And leadership is no different. You can do 100 worthwhile things this week and still neglect the one thing that would make the greatest difference. You can help lead a church with a full calendar, a business with a full pipeline, or a team with a full project board and still be drifting. You can be faithful, exhausted, sincere, and completely unclear about whether the work is producing the outcome you claim to want. That hurts a little, I know, but it is worth saying because there is a version of busyness that feels noble, while it quietly keeps us from having to make hard choices. Strategy is hard because strategy requires you to choose. It requires you to say, this matters more than that. It requires you to say, we cannot do everything. It requires you to say, this program, this meeting, this habit, this initiative, or this commitment may not be bad, but it may not be helping us accomplish the thing we say is most important. And that is difficult because leaders are usually surrounded by good things. Nobody has to convince you that obvious nonsense should be removed from the calendar. If you're holding a weekly meeting called Synergy Alignment and Vision Casting, and nobody can tell you what happens there, I think we have an easy first cut. The hard part is deciding between good things, the ministry event that people enjoy, the team process that has always existed, the report that takes hours to produce because someone asked for it in 2014 and nobody had the courage to stop, The weekly meeting that everybody complains about, but everybody attends because apparently it has been grandfathered into the organizational constitution. Those are harder. But that is where strategy begins. Here is the question I want to keep in front of you. What outcome are you trying to create? And what are we doing this week that plausibly moves us toward it? Not just what are we doing, not what have we been working on, not how many people are involved. What outcome are we trying to create? And what are we doing that actually gets us closer? Take a church, for example. The elders say, we want to make mature disciples. Good. That is not controversial. That is an excellent aim. But what does that mean in observable terms? What would mature disciples look like? More biblical literacy? Greater faithfulness? More resilient marriages? More people serving? More thoughtful engagement with Scripture? More courageous witness? More humility? Fewer arguments about the temperature in the sanctuary? Probably all the above, although I'm not promising miracles. Then comes the strategic question. Which things on our calendar are helping form those people? Because it is possible to have a very active church that is not strategically making disciples. You can have events, announcements, meals, programs, flyers, committees, sign-up sheets, and Brother Doug in charge of folding tables, and still never answer the question, what is producing the outcome we say we want? The same is true in business. You may say you want to retain customers, build trust, serve people well, or grow your organization. Fine. But then look at where your people are spending their time. Are they doing work that changes the customer experience? Are they identifying the real bottleneck? Are they learning why good customers leave? Are they testing assumptions about what people value? Or are they creating a 32 slide deck about a problem everyone already understands? Again, I'm not against slides. I have made slides. I have seen slides. I have been personally injured by slides. But a slide deck is not a strategy. A strategy is a credible theory of how your actions will create the outcome you need. If we do this, then this should happen, because that is the sentence. If you cannot finish it, you may have a task. You may have enthusiasm. You may have a tradition. You may even have a very expensive consultant's binder. But you do not yet have a strategy. So let me give you a simple way to think about your work. There is maintenance work. There is improvement work. And there is strategic work. Maintenance work keeps things from falling apart. You answer the messages. You process the paperwork. You resolve the normal problems. You make sure people get paid, doors get unlocked, emails get answered, and nobody accidentally orders 400 branded stress balls for the annual retreat. Maintenance matters. Ignore it long enough and the whole system starts making noises that no leader wants to hear. Then there is improvement work. This is where you make the existing system better. You streamline a process. You train a team. You improve communication. You fix the thing that has been annoying everybody for 2 years, but nobody wanted to touch because it involved a spreadsheet created during the Bush administration. Improvement work is good work, but strategic work is different. Strategic work asks whether you are addressing the right problem in the first place. It identifies the outcome that matters, the obstacle standing in the way, and the choices most likely to change the situation. It asks where you have leverage. It asks what needs to stop. It asks what would make the rest of your work easier, more effective, or unnecessary. And this is why leaders often do not spend enough time on it. Strategic work is uncomfortable. Maintenance rewards responsiveness. Improvement rewards competence. Strategy requires judgment. It requires you to make choices under uncertainty. It requires you to risk disappointing people. It requires you to say, we are not going to do that right now, even when that is a perfectly good idea brought to you by a perfectly nice person whom you'll see at church on Sunday. But if everything is a priority, nothing is. If every initiative matters equally, no initiative matters strategically. And if you are always responding to the loudest problem, you will eventually discover that the loudest problem has become the leader of your organization. Now, I want to bring in a biblical picture because Scripture is relentlessly practical about this sort of thing. In Luke 10, Martha is busy, very busy. She is serving, she is preparing, she is carrying responsibility. She is trying to make things work while her sister Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet. And Martha eventually says what every overworked leader has wanted to say at some point: Lord, do you not care? I have done all the work. I have carried the load. I have handled the details. I have made the thing happen. And apparently, nobody has noticed. The lesson is not that service is unimportant. Martha was doing necessary work. The problem was that her work had become disconnected from the thing that mattered most in that moment. Jesus did not rebuke her for caring about the meal. He confronts her anxiety and distraction. Martha had motion. Mary had focus. And a lot of us have a little Martha in us. We can turn busyness into a moral category. We can start to believe that whoever is most exhausted must be the most faithful. But that is not always true. Sometimes the person who pauses, asks the better question, and chooses the more important thing is the person doing the most faithful work in the room. So here's your assignment this week. Take 20 minutes, pull up your calendar from last week. Look at the major blocks of time and ask yourself, was that maintenance, improvement, or strategic work? No shame, no self-condemnation, just honesty. Then ask yourself, what did I do last week that plausibly moved my most important outcome forward? Not what kept me busy. Not what made me feel productive. What moved the mission forward? And if the answer is unclear, that is not a reason to panic. That is a reason to pause. Maybe you need to define the outcome more clearly. Maybe you need to stop doing something. Maybe you need to delegate something. Maybe you need to have the conversation you have been avoiding. Maybe you need to cancel the meeting. Yes, I said it. Cancel the meeting. The world may continue spinning. Your organization will probably survive without a 45-minute status update in which 6 people explain that they are still working on the thing they explained they were working on last Tuesday. The point is not to become less responsible. The point is to become more deliberate, because motion is not progress. A packed schedule is not evidence of purpose. And being tired at the end of the day does not necessarily mean you spent your energy on what mattered most. Your job as a leader is not to prove that everybody is working. Your job is to help people work towards something that matters. That is strategy. Thanks for listening to the Fulker Lab podcast. If this episode made you think of a leader, a minister, an analyst, a colleague, or a friend who has been running hard but may need to pause and ask a better question, send it to them. And if you want more conversations about intelligence, strategy, leadership, and discernment, subscribe wherever you listen and join me at the Fulker Lab. Until next time, think more clearly, decide confidently, lead with integrity, and act strategically.